So we're diving deep into workers' comp in Southern California today.
Right.
Not exactly, the most glamorous topic.
Right.
But whether you're an employee or running the show, this is need-to-know stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Especially in a place like SoCal where, things move fast.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of misconceptions about workers' comp out there.
For sure.
So let's unpack this. You shared this great guide with us.
Right.
And it seems like it's more than just checking a box on a form.
Yeah.
Workers' comp.
It's a common misconception.
Okay.
People think it's just a formality, but it's really designed to be a safety net.
Okay.
For both employees and employers.
Interesting. So how does that work exactly? The safety net idea.
Well, for employees, it means they know they're covered if something happens on the job.
Mm-hmm.
Medical care, financial support, that peace of mind.
Right.
And for employers, it actually helps prevent lawsuits. It provides a structured way to deal with workplace injuries.
So it's a win-win. But it doesn't cover every little thing, and I'm guessing it doesn't apply if I, spill coffee on myself.
Well, you have to think of it as arising out of and in the course of employment.
Okay.
So that coffee spill, probably not covered.
Okay.
But tripping over a loose cable while you're rushing to a meeting, that's a different story.
So location matters?
Exactly. And the nature of the incident.
Okay, so what about this whole thing about, filing a claim being the same as suing your employer?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
And a total myth. Workers' comp is no fault.
Okay.
So think of car insurance.
Okay.
You wouldn't hesitate to use it after an accident, even if you're at fault.
Right.
It's about getting you back on the road.
Okay.
Same principle here. It's about recovery and getting people back to work.
So if I do, trip over that cable and twist my ankle,
Right.
I shouldn't hesitate to file a claim.
Exactly. It's there to protect you.
So what are the first steps then if something happens? Walk me through it.
First things first, report the injury to your employer ASAP.
Right away.
Right away. California law gives you 30 days, but the sooner the better.
Got it.
Then your employer is legally required to give you a claim form within 1 working day.
Okay.
And that kickstarts the process.
So then what? Do I just wait?
Well, the insurance company has up to 90 days to investigate.
90 days.
Yeah. They might need more information, schedule medical exams, that sort of thing.
So it's a whole process.
It is.
And during that time, what kind of support am I entitled to?
Well, your employer has to authorize up to $10,000 for initial medical treatment.
$10,000?
Yes, while they're reviewing your claim. So you can get the care you need right away.
Wow.
And then there are temporary disability benefits.
Right, to cover lost wages.
Exactly. Those are so important.
So how does that work? How much do you actually get?
In California, it's usually about 2/3 of your average weekly pay.
Okay.
There are minimum and maximum limits, though, set by the state.
Makes sense. So it helps, but it's not a complete replacement.
Right. It's meant to ease the burden while you recover.
Are there other types of support too?
Yeah, you might be eligible for rehabilitation services.
Rehabilitation.
Yeah, things like physical therapy
Yep.
or even retraining for a new role.
Okay.
It all depends on your injury and your job.
So they really try to cover all the bases.
They do. The goal is to get you back to work as soon as possible, but safely.
That makes sense.
But of course, not every claim goes perfectly.
Right. And that's where things can get complicated.
Exactly. And that's when you might want to consider getting some legal help.
Okay. So when should I start thinking about that?
Well, if your claim is outright denied,
Okay.
or if your employer is being difficult or delaying things,
Right.
that's when you need someone on your side who knows this system.
Because sometimes those delays can be really tough to deal with.
Absolutely.
Right.
Especially when you're already dealing with an injury.
So it's not just about the injury itself.
Right.
It's about understanding your rights and how to navigate the process.
Exactly.
And that can be complicated.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with permanent disabilities. That adds a whole other layer.
Right. And I want to make sure we have time to unpack all of that.
Of course.
So when we come back, let's dig deeper into the medical treatment side of things.
Okay.
And those all-important return to work scenarios.
Sounds good.
Stick with us. We'll be back in a flash after this quick break.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dig into the medical treatment side of workers' comp.
All right.
Because it's not always as simple as, go see a doctor and you're good to go, right?
Yeah.
You'd be surprised. The medical treatment is about more than just treating the immediate injury. It's also about documenting everything.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, every doctor's visit, every test, every therapy session, it all builds a record.
Right.
And those records, they become crucial evidence if there are any disputes about your claim.
So it's like building a case file as you go.
Exactly. It connects the dots between your injury and your work. and helps determine when and how you can safely return to work.
That makes sense. So let's say I need to see a doctor for a work-related injury. What are my options? Do I just go to my regular physician?
It can depend. After an injury, your employer might have a specific doctor or clinic they want you to go to for that initial evaluation.
Makes sense. They want to make sure you're taken care of quickly.
Right. But sometimes you might be able to see your own pre-designated physician.
Pre-designated.
Yeah, it's like choosing your work injury doctor ahead of time, just in case something happens.
Oh, okay.
So if you have one of those, you might be able to see them instead.
So it's good to have that set up in advance.
It can be helpful, yeah. And then there's also the Medical Provider Network, or MPN.
What's that?
Basically, it's a network of healthcare providers that the employer's insurance has approved for treating work injuries.
Okay.
If they have an MPN, you'll most likely need to choose a doctor within that network.
Got it. So a few different routes you might end up going down. But whatever happens, I'm remembering what you said earlier about documentation.
Yeah.
What kind of things should I be keeping track of? Seriously, everything. Every single medical visit, every prescription, every therapy session, write it all down. Even the little things.
Like what?
Like over-the-counter medications, heat pads, anything you're using to manage your symptoms.
So those details matter.
They can. It's all proof of how your injury is impacting your daily life.
It's like a timeline of your recovery.
Exactly. And I always tell people, keep your own journal, too, alongside those official medical records. Jot down your symptoms, pain levels, how the injury affects your sleep, everything.
Good advice. Now, you mentioned disputes earlier. What happens if there's a disagreement about the injury or the treatment I need, or even my ability to work?
Right. Well, in those cases, you might need what's called a medical legal evaluation.
What's that?
So basically, a neutral third-party doctor, someone not involved in your regular care, will assess your situation.
Okay.
They'll look at your medical records, maybe do their own exam, and then they give an unbiased opinion.
Like a tiebreaker.
Yeah, something like that. Now, who this evaluator is depends on whether or not you have a lawyer. How so?
If you do have a lawyer, they'll typically work with the other side to choose what's called an agreed medical evaluator, or AME.
Okay, so everyone agrees on who's evaluating.
Right. But if you don't have a lawyer, then you'll see a qualified medical evaluator, or a QME, and they're assigned from a list provided by the state.
Got it. So either way, it's important to be prepared for that evaluation.
Absolutely. Be honest, be thorough, don't downplay your symptoms or how the injuries affected you.
Because that evaluation can make a big difference.
It can, yeah. Okay, now shifting gears a little bit.
Right.
Let's talk about returning to work.
Right, because that can be a whole process in itself.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
Even when you're recovering, going back to work isn't always easy.
Right, and sometimes you're not 100% back to normal right away.
Exactly, and that's where work restrictions come in.
Okay, what does that mean?
So your doctor might clear you to go back to work, but with certain limitations.
Like what?
Reduced hours, modified tasks, extra breaks, that kind of thing.
So for example, if I have a back injury, my doctor might clear me for work, but say, no heavy lifting for a while.
Exactly. Or maybe you need to avoid certain repetitive motions or prolonged standing. It really depends on the injury and the physical demands of your job.
So it's about easing back into things.
Exactly.
But what happens if my employer can't accommodate those restrictions? Like, what if my job just requires heavy lifting?
Right, and that happens sometimes. Then there are a few options. You might continue receiving those temporary total disability benefits, the TTD, while you recover further.
Okay, so I could keep getting those payments while we figure things out.
Right, or if it's clear you can't return to your old job even with modifications, you might be eligible for vocational rehabilitation services.
Vocational rehab, what is that?
So basically, they help you transition into a new role, maybe even a whole new career path that works better for you.
Oh, wow. So like retraining programs and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. They help give you the skills you need to get back on your feet.
That's great. So there's support for finding a new path if you need it. What about financial help during that transition period?
Well, there's also something called Supplemental Job Displacement Benefits, or SJDB.
What's that?
It's basically a voucher you can use for things like skill enhancement programs, professional training, even certain educational courses.
So it helps you get the training you need for a new career.
Exactly. It's designed to give you the resources to adapt and succeed even after a serious injury.
That's amazing. There's so much to think about with workers' comp. It's really a whole system.
It is, yeah. And speaking of which, we haven't even gotten to the financial side of things.
Right. Those temporary and permanent disability payments.
Exactly. And those can get a little complicated.
Okay, well, let's dive into those details when we come back after the break. All right, so let's talk about the financial side of workers' comp now, because those temporary and permanent disability payments, it can get a little confusing.
Yeah, it definitely can. So we talked about those temporary disability benefits, the TTD.
Right, and those kick in when you can't work because of your injury.
Exactly. And there are actually two types, temporary total disability, or TTD, and then there's temporary partial disability, or TPD.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Well, TTD is when you can't work at all because of your injury, like your doctor says you're off your feet for now.
Right.
TPD is when you might be able to do some work, but not your full job duties, maybe lighter duties or something.
Okay, so it depends on what your doctor clears you for.
Exactly. But for either one, the goal is to help cover some of those lost wages while you recover.
And just to remind us, how much are we talking about usually with those TTD payments?
So in California, it's generally around 2/3 of your average weekly pay.
Okay.
But there are those minimum and maximum limits set by the state. It's not a complete replacement for your income, more like a safety net.
Right, okay. Now, what about when the injury leads to longer-term problems? That's when those permanent disability benefits come in, right?
Exactly. If your doctor determines that you're going to have lasting effects from your injury, that's when those might kick in.
And how do those work? Are they calculated the same way as the temporary benefits?
Not quite. It gets a little more complex here. So permanent disability benefits, they're based on something called a rating system.
A rating system.
Yeah, so think of it like a credit score for your ability to work after the injury.
Okay.
It takes into account your medical condition, how severe it is, your age, your occupation, all sorts of factors.
So it's very specific to your situation.
Very. And that rating, it determines how much you'll receive in benefits and for how long.
So two people with the same injury could end up with different benefits.
Exactly. It all depends on how that injury impacts their earning capacity.
Wow, that's a lot to consider. And I know in the most serious cases, workers' comp even provides death benefits, right?
That's right. If a work-related injury or illness results in death, those benefits help support the surviving family members.
And what do those benefits usually look like?
Typically, they cover things like burial expenses and then their ongoing payments to the dependents.
Like a spouse or children.
Exactly. It's there to provide some financial stability during an incredibly difficult time.
Well, this has been incredibly informative. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of workers' comp, but it's so important to have a basic understanding of how it all works.
I agree. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to something as important as this.
Absolutely. And remember, everyone, what we've discussed today, it's for informational purposes only.
Right. It's always best to get personalized advice for your specific situation.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to think about. We've talked a lot about traditional employment, but what about all the freelancers and independent contractors out there? The gig economy, right? Should they be covered by workers' comp too? It's something to ponder as the way we work continues to evolve.
Definitely something to think about.
It's a big question for the future of work. But for now, that's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into workers' comp.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you learned something new. Until next time.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.